78 Fight News here. Real briefly, I'm going to try to get through this video as quickly as possible. But I want to take some time out to show some respect and pay homage to a few fighters that's been on my mind. I think as boxing fans, we do ourselves and the sport of boxing a disservice when we don't speak about these guys. You know, we spend our day arguing on YouTube about nonsense, but it's very easy to see when somebody does not have an understanding of the history of the sport of boxing, because boxing has changed some, but so much has not changed in boxing. And I want to take some time out to honor these couple of fighters that I'm going to speak on today, so bear with me. The first fighter I'd like to pay some homage to is a fighter by the name of Tom Melanew. Tom Melanew was born a slave in Virginia in 1784. He came from a fighting pedigree. His father, his brothers were all fighting slaves. You know, Melanew was the best fighting slave in the country. Plantation owner after plantation owner from all over the country traveled to Virginia with their slaves to challenge Melanew. Melanew was victorious at every turn. It was rumored that Melanew's his slave master had so much respect for him, allegedly, that he freed him. He had made so much money from Melanew that he freed him, gave him his freedom, and gave him $500 to start a new life. Now Melanew, all he knew was fighting. So what he decided to do was, he decided to go to New York in search of work. But while in New York, he started hearing stuff on the streets. He started hearing things about a fighter in England who was making buku money by the name of Tom Cribb. And when he heard about the type of money Tom Cribb was making, he said, you know what, fighting is for me. So he got on the boat and he went to England. He arrived in England talking cash shit. Okay, he was the best self-promoter you could find. He arrived in England and went to every street corner, every bar and pub, and told people, I'm the champion of America. Nobody can beat me. Where's Tom Cribb? Right? Calling out Tom Cribb. People looked at him like he was crazy, but they thought he was funny. You know? So what he did was he caught the attention of a guy by the name of Bill Richmond. Now Bill Richmond was a former slave himself and a former prize fighter. Richmond had become a legend in England. Okay? Despite being black, despite being a former slave, he became a fucking legend from his victories in prize fighting. Richmond was basically a welterweight by today's standards. Okay? And Richmond himself had a fight with Tom Cribb in 1805. He lost that fight, but he was giving up 20 years in age and 50 pounds. And still he fought admirably, so he became a legend. He had the first boxing gym in London, England. A black man, former slave. Now, what Richmond did was he took Melanew under his wing, teaching him the sweet science. You know, Melanew was more of a brawler, you know, and Richmond was a scientist in the ring. And he had to be, being so small, fighting up against guys who outweighed him by 40 and 50 pounds. He learned how to stick and move, how to tire the big man out. And he started to teach this stuff to Melanew. So after a little while of training, Richmond ended up getting Melanew a few fights. And Melanew was victorious. But Melanew had this ego. This was out of control. Okay? He liked to drink. He liked to party with the ladies, the prostitutes. When he should be training, he gets found in the bar, drunk, passed out, you know, enjoying his newfound freedom. So, by this time, Tom Cribb heard of Melanew, wanted to fight him, accepted the challenge. In 1810, these two men faced off. Now understand, Melanew and Cribb at the time was Pacquiao Mayweather today. Everybody wanted to see it. Boxing at that time was different than it is today. Boxing was more of a was more like MMA. Okay, the rules were different. Okay, you could pick somebody up and body slam them. You could kick them in the nuts. You know, this was more like organized street fighting. You know what I'm saying? So what happened is, in 1810 when they fought, the story has it that the fight went back and forth for a little while, and Melanu started to get the best of Tom Cribb, the champion. Melanu had him tied up on the ropes, and crazy Tom Cribb fans stormed the ring and attacked Tom Melanu like some wrestling shit. They just attacked him. Okay? And in the process of this, Tom Melanu's hand got broken from one of the fans who stormed the ring. Once order was restored to the ring, Melanu continued to fight on. The fight went on and on and on. You know, back then, round didn't end until somebody went down, and you had 30 seconds to come back to scratch, kind of like dog fighting, if y'all aren't familiar with dog fighting. So, but I'm not gonna go into that. But anyway, what happens is Melanu gets Cribb in trouble again. Okay, knocking him out unconscious. And when he knocks him out, Tom Cribb's management jumps into the ring and starts accusing Melanu of having bullets in his hand, holding, you know, metal in his hand to make his hands heavier. So while the referee in Melanu's camp are trying to disprove this nonsense, Tom Cribb is over in the corner recovering. I'm telling you, this sounds like some WWE shit, but this is what they say happened. So Cribb gets up and is allowed to continue fighting and ends up defeating Tom Melanu. Now, Tom Melanu became a legend as well after this fight. The courage and gameness he displayed in that loss, so-called loss, because it was a victory, but you know, the robbery that he had to go through made him a legend. The next fight I want to discuss in this video was George Dixon. George Dixon was the first black fighter to win an American title. Dixon, like so many other black fighters, were forced to take dives, participate in these fixed, rigged-ass fights in order to make a paycheck. So nobody knows how good George Dixon could have been had it not been for those circumstances. Dixon beat up a white fighter so badly once that they banned mixed fights in the South. Okay? Blacks versus whites couldn't happen in the South anymore. Right? This is a guy who had 51 draws. This is the type of robbery I'm talking about. I'm talking about when you go in and you whoop somebody's ass and the referee says, "Hey, it was a draw." You see, that's the reality that black fighters had to go through. George Dixon. The next fighter in this I want to discuss is Jack Johnson. Jack Johnson became the heavyweight champion of the world in 1908 when he defeated Tommy Burns. Now, Tommy Burns was only the champion because James Jeffries retired. His cowardice led him to retire because he didn't want to face any black fighters. Okay, this is his words. He would not break the color line. He would not face any black fighters, and the black man would never be the champion of the world, all that kind of stuff. So Tommy Burns became the champion. Jack Johnson moves in, beats his ass, right? Now, the whole country was outraged at this point. The film of this fight was confiscated so that there would be no record of a black man beating the heavyweight champion of the world that was white. Now, Jack Johnson still was not given any credit because James Jeffries was basically considered to be the heavyweight champion of the world. Now, Jack Johnson knew that he had to defeat Jeffries in order to get the credit he deserved. So he taunted James Jeffries for years, until enough pressure was put on Jeffries from whites and blacks to come out of retirement and face Jack Johnson. Whites were saying stuff like, Jeffries, it's your responsibility as a white man to defeat this black demon. Now, Jeffries came out of retirement and got his ass whooped. To make a long story short, Jack Johnson beat the dog shit out of him. Okay? And this was such a glorious day for black people in America in 1910. But what happened is, whites took to the streets in savage mobs, attacking and murdering black people to steal their joy. Riots broke out all over the country. In every city, there was some rioting. There was even one story of a boy, a black boy, who was picked up off the street by two white men and taken to an alley where the white man let his son beat up on this black boy, tied him up and let the white kid beat up on his son and told his son, yeah, Jack Johnson may be the heavyweight champion of the world, but you're still a nigga. And this was the type of stuff that was going on all over the country. Jack Johnson was hated so much by this country for his taste in gambling and dealing with white women, his arrogance, his confidence in a time where black people were not supposed to have any. He was hated so much that the government put cases on him. They charged this man with some of the most ridiculous crimes, traveling across the street with a white woman. Just ridiculous shit. Okay? It got to the point where Jack Johnson had to flee the country. And in 1915, Jack Johnson, who wanted to come back to America, who was having money problems, he made a deal with the United States government that he would lose a fight if they granted him, permission to come back into the country. So the legend goes that he agreed. He took a dive in 1915 and still was not allowed to get back in. The next fighter I'd like to discuss in this video is Sam Langford. Sam Langford is considered to be the greatest fighter of all time by a few hardcore boxing fans. And I won't argue with him. Sam Langford had a record of 179 wins, 30 losses, 128 wins coming by way of knockout. Langford, in 24 years of boxing, never got a title shot. This man had arguably one of the greatest resumes in boxing history, because he was forced to face black fighters over and over again. All of the tough, stiff competition, he had to fight them. He wasn't afforded the luxury of knocking out some bum from some fucking European country. He had to fight the top of the line fighters constantly and still finish with a record of 179 victories. Now, Langford was ducked by guys like Jack Dempsey, who openly said he would not fight a black fighter at that time. And yet some people still consider Jack Dempsey to be one of the greatest fighters of all time. You see, I dismiss guys like Jack Dempsey, and this is why I call guys like him bums, because the politics of boxing at that time, these guys did not have to face the best competition. These guys did not have to fight black fighters. Okay? So why would I give this man any respect or any credit? Jack Dempsey is a bum in my opinion. The next fighter I'd like to discuss is Joe Louis. Of course, we all know Joe Louis. 66 wins, 3 losses, 52 wins coming by way of knockout. In 1937, Joe Louis became the first black heavyweight champion since Jack Johnson. And this came with a lot of responsibility, because Joe Louis had to abide by certain rules of conduct. And these rules were, he had to be the anti-Jack Johnson. He had to be the good Negro. He could not take any pictures with white women. He could not gloat after defeating a white fighter. He could not show any joy and happiness at their demise. These were some of the rules. Joe Louis got robbed so much. In order to get a title shot, he had to give his opponent a piece of him. His opponent had ownership of him and was getting a percentage of his fights for the rest of his fucking career, just to get a title shot. This is the type of shit that these fighters had to go through to get the little bit that they had. Joe Louis, despite all of the racism and injustice he faced and that black people faced in this country, somehow loved this country, somehow displayed this patriotism that came from somewhere I don't fucking know where. But he displayed this patriotism, and in 1942 he joined the army. And he went around fighting exhibition fights and going to the different army bases. He visited over 5 million troops, building up the morale. And after he left the army and tried to return to boxing, Joe Louis was in debt. And the same country that used him and was so in love with him when he defeated Matt Schmeling turned their back on him, and Joe Louis spent the rest of his life trying to pay off taxes for the United States government. The man gave up 4 years of his prime to join the United States Army, to display patriotism, to tell this country, I love you despite you not loving me. And he was rewarded with a fat ass bill from the IRS. Next fighter I'd like to discuss in this video is Henry Armstrong. Henry Armstrong, like Sam Langford, is considered to be the greatest fighter of all time by hardcore boxing fans, and I will not argue with them either. Henry Armstrong had a record of 150 victories, 21 losses, and 101 victories coming by way of knockout. Now, that's his professional record, but before even making it to professional, Henry Armstrong fought in over 150 fixed and set up amateur fights in order to get his name out there on the West Coast. He traveled the country fighting in these WWE type of fights in order to build his name and reputation, in order to make a living. This is what black fighters had to go through. So Armstrong was the first fighter to hold down 3 weight divisions simultaneously at a time where boxing only had 8 weight divisions. How many weight divisions? What, 17 weight divisions boxing has now? In a time where there were only 8 weight divisions, the man held down 3 of them at the same time, accomplishing this in a 10-month span. Now, Henry Armstrong should have won the middleweight crown also, and that would have been his 4th weight division. But in 1942, he was robbed. It was a set-up fucking fight. The referee, by the name of George Blake, robbed Henry Armstrong of his 4th world title by calling the fight a draw. The next fighter I'd like to discuss in this video is the old master, Joe Gans. Joe Gans had a professional record of 145 wins, 10 losses, 16 draws, with 100 wins coming by way of knockout. Now, Joe Gans was spotted in what they call the Battle Royal, where they would take black people and tie them up together, sometimes blindfold them, and you get 5 to 8 people and make them beat the shit out of each other. And the last one standing would be the victor and paid $4 or $5. Now, Joe Gans was spotted in this way and was trained to be a prize fighter. Now, I'm going to dismiss all 10 of Joe Gans' losses because no one knows how great Joe Gans could have been if it wasn't for him being forced to fight in a time where black fighters had to fight fixed fights. Okay? It's on the record in boxing history that Terry McGovern, the featherweight champion, who defeated Joe Gans in a set-up fight. Everybody knew this was a set-up fight. Okay? So, Joe Gans held down the lightweight division from 1902 to 1908 and destroying everything in his path. The next fighter I'd like to discuss is Archie Moore. Archie Moore is a true legend, a true pioneer in boxing. Archie Moore had a record of 185 victories, 23 losses with 131 knockouts, at least. Some say 145 knockouts, depending on who books you believe. Now, Archie Moore won the lightweight title at the age of 39 or 40. There's no way of really knowing his age because Archie Moore used to lie about his age a lot. And Archie Moore was denied a title shot for so long that by the time he won it, he was already an old man. And he still held it down for 11 fucking years after that. Now, Archie Moore has more KOs than anyone else in boxing history. He's a true legend. This is a man who inspired George Foreman. Archie Moore himself was inspired by Jack Johnson, he says. But he trained George Foreman in his fight against Ali. Next fighter in this video I'd like to discuss is the legendary Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali is probably the most famous boxer of all time. He had a record of 56 victories, 5 losses. He was a gold medal winner in the 1960 Olympic Games as an amateur. As a professional, he had 19 title defenses. He was the only fighter in boxing history to win the lineal heavyweight title 3 times. He was the first fighter in boxing history to win the heavyweight title again after he had retired. The next fighter I'd like to discuss in this video is Sugar Ray Robinson. Now, Sugar Ray Robinson has been a hot topic of debate here on YouTube for the last 2 or 3 weeks, so I'm going to keep this short because I know everybody's tired of hearing about Ray Robinson. But Ray Robinson, in my opinion, was the greatest single fighter of all time. Ray Robinson is considered by most boxing historians and all of his peers to be the greatest fighter of all time. And his peers, that means a lot, okay? When other fighters say that this was the greatest fighter of all time, that means something, okay? Now, he was named Fighter of the Century by the Associated Press in 1999. He was the first fighter of any race to receive a portion of television revenue for his fights. He understood the business side of boxing, and he went out and he got his money, okay? He owned an entire block of businesses in Harlem. He retired in 1952 with a record of 131 wins and 3 losses. He returned in 1955 when he was having money trouble. And between 1955 and 1965, he was not the same fighter. Okay? He accumulated a lot of losses and a lot of wins, but he was not the same fighter. Clearly something was missing from him. He had slowed down drastically. But Ray Robinson, Henry Armstrong, Sam Langford, Jack Johnson, Joe Louis, all these fighters that I've named were the bricklayers. These were the fighters who laid the foundation for the great fighters that we have today.